Welcome to this week's Parsha Shiur, Parsha's Noach. I hope you all had a wonderful Yontif, a remarkable Yontif for the whole of Klal Yisrael. Looking forward to share Parsha Shiurim, Halacha Shiurim in the winter season, and Parsha's Noach. I've got two beautiful pieces which I'm looking forward to share with you. If you're listening online, please do email me at j.golker@gmail.com and I'll send you the handout. The first piece, there are only two pieces today, but they're both magnificent. The first, I give credit to Rabbi Rosenfeld, dear friend and colleague, and he put two different pieces together which I'd like to present. The first piece is an item from the Netziv. The Netziv famously wrote Hoemek Dova, Pirush on Chumash. This was the Parsha Shiur that he would give in Velozhin after Shacharis every day, and we have the benefit of it in the Sefer Hoemek Dova. And he has a Hakdama to the whole of Chumash, and he also has a Hakdama to Sefer Bereshis. So in his Hakdama to Sefer Bereshis, he explains why Sefer Bereshis is called the Sefer HaYosher, the Sefer of the upright. So let's take a look, and some very interesting things emerge. So, says, and I've contracted the main items from this. Says the Netziv, Zeh Sefer HaNikra Sefer Bereshis Nikra B'fi HaNaviim Sefer HaYosher. The Naviim call Sefer Bereshis Sefer HaYosher. Umefarish Rabbi Yochanan, Zeh Sefer Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov Shenikru Yesharim. It's called Sefer HaYosher because ultimately Sefer Bereshis is the Sefer of the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who were called Yesharim, Shenema Thomas Nafshi Mois Yesharim. That Bilam, this says that he would like to die a Mois Yesharim, a death like the Yesharim, and he's referring to the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. V'yesh lahavin, says the Netziv, Hatam Loma Nikra Bilam es Avosenu b'Shem Yesharim. Why did he specifically call the Avos Yesharim? Beyichud v'loy tzadikim or chasidim v'chadayme. There are plenty of very worthy appellations that he could have used. Why does he call them Yesharim rather than the more common expressions of tzadikim or chasidim? V'gam lama mechuna zeh sefer hayichud b'kinu Yesharim. And furthermore, aside from the question of why did Bilam call the Avos Yesharim, why is the whole sefer called by this name? V'ho'inyan. Next paragraph. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yashahu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the ultimate person of yashrus, of integrity, of honesty, of uprightness. Ve'ena sovel, and he doesn't tolerate at a boifen shehol elu. I think sheholchin b'derech hayasha gam balichas olam v'lo bakmimus. And he doesn't want people to behave in a crooked way. He wants people to behave in an upright way in their interactions with others in the worldly matters. And that was a particular praise of the Avos. Certainly they were tzadikim, they were chasidim, and they were oyavei Hashem, but in the most impeccable way. In addition to that, they were Yesharim. They interacted and behaved with the world around them, the non-Jewish world, even very lowly idol worshippers, but they did so in a very generous, kind, benevolent way, because ultimately it would benefit mankind. He gives examples. Look how Avram Avinu, what efforts he went to, Lihispalel al Sodom, to daven for Sodom, even though he was sort of totally opposed to their evil behavior, and he was, it was antithetical to his own values, but yet he still interacted with them in a very positive way. He davened for them and negotiated with HaKadosh Baruch Hu for them. But he davened for them. Amazing. In other words, Yitzchak had major problems with Avimelech. He kidnapped his wife, and he was again the pole opposite of the holy and pure Yitzchak Avinu, and he took his wife for illicit intentions, and yet Yitzchak's interactions with him were in a very positive way. He davened for him as well. And lastly, Yaakov Avinu, he interacted with Lavan for many, many years. He was in Lavan's house 20 years, and Lavan did everything he could to be oiker, to uproot Yaakov Avinu and to destroy him, and to cheat him and to be crooked. But yet, when it came to it, Yaakov Avinu spoke gently and softly to him in a very pleasant way, and therefore he was able to appease Lavan very quickly. And you learn so much from the Avos in their daily interactions, and that's why the Sefer is called Sefer HaYashar. So in addition to being Tzaddikim and Chasidim and all those wonderful things, they had a certain Yashrus about them, which means an interaction in the world in a way of integrity and honesty, with an uprightness. And that was really why, that was the hallmark, if you like, of the Avos, and therefore the Sefer is so called. And then the Siv explains further why Dafka Bilam calls them and wants to die in that fashion, but that's further in the Hamek Dava. But why am I bringing this? Because Rabbi Yoni Rosenfeld alerted me to an amazing Chasam Sofer. The Chasam Sofer in droshes on Simchas Torah, and many darshanim do this. They try and connect the end of the Torah with the beginning of the Torah. Here in London, Rabbi Pinchas Roberts would do this often, and many, and just researching for the Shiur, I see many darshanim try and do the same, make a connection between the end of the Torah and the beginning. And in the droshes for Simchas Torah, Ois Yutes, the Chasam Sofer makes an amazing connection between the end of the Torah and the beginning of the Torah, and he's drawing on this concept of Yashrus. Let's take a look. This is the second box on the page. Yisrael Bereshis. Ki makar v'shorish hakol hu Yashrus. The underpinning, the root of everything, is honesty and integrity. B'tchila hayarak b'zchus Yashrus and shalavas. In the beginning, in Sefer Bereshis, you just had the Yashrus of the Avos, the integrity and the straightness of the Avos, v'lo b'zchus atzmoin, and not because of the Bnei Yisrael themselves. For example, when they came out of Mitzrayim, Pesach was a gift. It was an unwarranted gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Klal Yisrael, but they weren't yet deserving. And it was only through the love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that He gave us this gift. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu's job was to embed this Yashrus, this quality of the Avos, into the Jewish people over the 40 years that he led them. And then, until at the very end of the Torah, after 40 years of Moshe Rabbeinu's leadership, Klal Yisrael attains the level of Yesharim. Va'oz nikur Yisrael, rotzolema Yoshar Kel. I.e., what is Yisrael? Yisrael is made up of the letters Yoshar Kel. They have the Yashrus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'lo rak Yashrus shel Avos, and not just the Yashrus of the Avos, ka'ochsin rak ma'aseh avosem yodem, when they go in the ways of their fathers. Ele yishrei kel mitzad atzmam, they had achieved that lofty level of Yashrus in their own right. So the Torah begins with the Yashrus of the Avos. Klal Yisrael were not yet at that level. And then, at the end of the Torah, after Klal Yisrael have come out of Mitzrayim, Moshe Rabbeinu leads them for 40 years, they have the Yashrus in their own right. Now listen to this. This is the second paragraph of the second box. The famous last pasuk of the Torah, which is the epitaph of Moshe Rabbeinu. Pirush. Amazing. The Chasam Sofer says that we're putting the comma in the wrong place. That all the wonderful things Moshe Rabbeinu did in the Midbar and breaking the luchos, le'enei kol Yisrael, says the Chasam Sofer, we're putting the comma in the wrong place. It's a different interpretation. We understand normally that he did all these amazing things in the Midbar, as Rashi sets out what it's referring to, all the Nissim in the Midbar, the Mon, the Be'er, and the Anne covered, and he took them out of Mitzrayim, and he gave them the Torah, le'enei kol Yisrael, in front of the eyes of the Jewish people. Says the Chasam Sofer, no. Put the comma after the word le'enei kol. After the word kol. He did all of this, le'enei kol, in front of everyone. Yisrael, what does that mean? Says, Rotzoloma yishrei kel me'atzom, because they had done it, they had achieved that lofty level of Yashrus. V'lo rak b'zchus avosom. V'zeh hoyanira le'enei kol, and that was apparent to the whole of mankind. I.e., they did this le'enei kol, what? Yisrael, that they were Yoshael, they had achieved that lofty level of Yashrus, and that was apparent to the whole of humankind. V'ro kol ha'amei haaretz kishem Hashem nikra lecha, like the pasuk says in Kisavoi. V'ro kol ha'amei haaretz kishem Hashem nikra lecha. Daika v'lo b'zchus havasecha, i.e., you've achieved this. And Moshe Rabbeinu achieved all of this. Omnom, Bereshis, however, at the very beginning of the Torah, Ubetchila hayarak Yashar Avos, Ki Bereshis Oisius Yashar Avos. Amazing. The words Bereshis is made up of the letters Yashar Avos. Yashar, Aleph Beis Tov, Avos the Avos. The Yashrus was only displayed by Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but Yisrael Oisius Yisrael Yashar Kel, i.e., that's what they achieved at the end of the Torah. So the connection between the beginning and the end of the Torah is this, that it started off, says the Chasam Sofer, there was Yashrus, which, as the Netziv says, is the hallmark of the Avos, and therefore the whole name of Sefer Bereshis is called Sefer HaYashar. That was unique to the Avos. But the goal of Moshe Rabbeinu was to instill this midah of Yashrus into the entire Jewish people, and indeed, that is what he achieved, and that is his final epitaph as recorded by the last pasuk of the Torah. So the Torah begins Bereshis, which is Tevis Yashar Avos, Aleph Beis Tov, Avos. The Yashrus was unique to the Avos, but it finishes with Le'enei Kol, that they have achieved all these wonderful things. Yisrael is Yashar Kel. The Klal Yisrael now had Yashrus, and Moshe Rabbeinu had achieved his goal of instilling the Yashrus, the midah of Yashrus, in the entire Jewish people. Okay, good. And you see this even today. You see that as Klal Yisrael, I once heard that in the Webster's dictionary, there is a verb, to Jew someone. To Jew someone means to cheat them. What a horrific thing. The Chas v'Shalom, there's a sharp practice in business. To Jew someone has become an adjective, a verb to describe underhand behavior. Chas v'Shalom, that's not Klal Yisrael. I don't think I've mentioned this before in one of the Shiurim, that one time, years ago, I was on a train and on the London Underground, and I was sitting next to a very fine person. And this fellow was working in a law firm, in one of the Magic Circle firms here in London, a very prestigious firm. And the fellow is a tremendous Ben Torah and a wonderful person. And I was talking to him, and he said to me, he wants to just write something down. Do you have a pen? So I go into my pockets and I pull out a pen, as I always do. And he said to me, okay, fine. 1 second, he said, is that your pen or is that your employer's pen? Because if it's your employer's pen, I don't want to write anything down. I don't want to use it for a non-business purpose. Now, mitzad halacha, we can discuss whether it's pachs mishav pruta, etc., etc. But it's a certain yashrus, a certain integrity, a certain honesty, and more than that, just an interaction, an erla goyim, a certain kiddush Hashem, and a pleasantness that is really what Yisrael, the hallmark of Yisrael, and that was the transition from Bereshis to Le'inei Kol Yisrael. They've now achieved, in the eyes of everyone, this level of Yashrus. Okay, let's press on. I've already made a brach on this. Now, let's begin with the opening psukim of Parshas Noach. Something remarkable is going to emerge. Eile told us Noach, Ish Tzadik Tomim Hoy B'Doreisov, Esolikim is Halech Noach, the familiar opening pasuk of this week's Sedra. Vayoled Noach Shleisha Bonim Eshem Eschom Ves Yoves. Noach has 3 children, and then the next pasuk, third pasuk in the Sedra, Vatishoches Haaretz Lefnei Elokim, Vatimole Haaretz Chomos. And the world was corrupt. It had degenerated terribly. Rashi tells us Vatishoches Loshen Erva V'Avodah Zarah is referring to promiscuity, immorality, and avodah zarah, idol worship. Vatimole haaretz chamos, gezel, says Rashi. So introduced in the beginning of this week's Sedra to a world of theft, of promiscuity, and of corruption. The question is, how did it go so bad so quickly? Last week's Sedra in Parshas Bereshis, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was talking to Adam and Chava. Yes, Adam Rishon and Chava sinned, and yes, there was Cain and Hevel, but to get to a world within 10 generations where it was full of theft, and promiscuity, and corruption, how did it sink so low so quickly? That's question number 1. Question number 2, we were already in last week's Sedra, at the end of Bereshis, we're introduced to Noach, and he's given his name. Why the name Noach? Number 1, the second question. And the third question is, there seems to be a connection between Noach's name and the descent of mankind. If you turn over to the next page, because at the end of last week's Sedra, at the very end of Parshas Bereshis, it says, Vayikra es Shemoy Noach, Leimar ze yenachamenu mima'aseinu me'itzvin yodeinu. Noach will people think it means comfort, but it doesn't. It means ease, as we'll see in Rashi in a minute. Min ha'adama she'er Hashem. Noach, with the birth of Noach, that's going to ease our existence, as we'll explain soon. And then a few psukim later, at the end of Parshas Bereshis, Vayar Hashem ki rabba ras ha'adam ba'aretz, that things were going terribly. V'chol yetzer machshavos libo rak kol hayom, that they had bad intentions all day. Vayinochem Hashem ki osa es ha'adam, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu regretted making man. Vayisatzev al libo. Vayom Hashem emcho es ha'adam asher barasi me'al pnei ha'adama. It seems that there is a connection between Noach's very name and the very quick degeneration of society. So 3 questions. Question number 1, how did it sink so low so quickly? Question number 2, why the name Noach? And question number 3, what is the connection between Noach's name and the descent of the moral standard of mankind? Now, the starting point is this. Rashi at the end of Bereshis explains to us the background of Noach's name. Ze Yenachamenu, says Rashi, Yonach mimenu es itzvon yodenu. He will ease for us the difficulty of our handiwork. What does that mean? Says Rashi, Ad shelo bon Noach lo hayah lehem kli macharesha. Before Noach's time, they didn't have any agricultural equipment. For hu heichin lohem, and he prepared it for them. For ha'is haaretz motzia kotzim v'dardarim kashezorim chitzim, and the land would bring up weeds and thorns and thistles when they were trying to grow wheat and barley. Mikilos shel Adam Rishon, because of the klola to Adam Rishon of and things calmed down a bit, eased in the days of Noach. V'zehu Yenachamenu. And don't be confused and think that the word Noach is connected to the word comfort, because otherwise he would be called Menachem. Noach is from the words of Yonach, that he eased the situation. In other words, Rashi tells us that Noach was so named because it was a portent for the future, that he would sort of bring a whole new, as it were, industrial revolution into the world by introducing agricultural tools and making life so much easier in the world in which they lived. The Medrash Tanchum, if you look at the beginning of the next box, says they would actually work with their hands. From the work, the difficulty of our hands, literally. Noilad Noach, but when Noach was born, says the Medrash, Hiskin lohem machareshos umagalos v'kardomes. He found plowing equipment, hoes and shovels and spades and things like that. V'chol kli melacha, and all other agricultural equipment. So let's think about that for a second. Noach, the very name, relates to the fact that he would make it easier in the agricultural world in which they lived. Not that he would give comfort, but he would ease their plight by introducing agricultural tools. I came across something astonishing. In Rabbi Rosner's Sefer, he quotes a Medrash, and I tried to research it myself, and I found that the source is a Sefer Chasidim, and he quotes a Medrash, we'll see the source in a second, that says that until the time of Noach, people didn't have fingers. In other words, they had a hand, but their hand was webbed. In other words, imagine all your fingers are sort of glued together. Life is very difficult. We, Baruch Hashem, have got fingers, and the independent fingers are able to move and to hold things. But if you have a webbed hand, farming is nigh impossible, because you can't hold any tools or agricultural implements. And therefore, says the Sefer Hasidim, when Noach came along, it was a total game changer. Because when it says that Noach was able to introduce agricultural tools, it means that they obviously understood that you could take metal and you could plow the land, but they weren't able to do it, according to the Sefer Hasidim, quoting this Medrash. And therefore, when Noach came along and they saw that he had fingers which separated, that was a game changer. That was an industrial revolution of the highest order. Let's take a look at the Sefer Hasidim. Why is it that fingers are like Yesedus, like they're like pegs? Or Pirsham Mefarshim Medrash Avkir. There is a not a very well-known Medrash Avkir, which I think stands for Omein B'Omeinu Kain Yihi Rotzain, and I think some people call it the Yalkut Raveni, and it's a Medrash. It's not a well-known Medrash on Bereshis and Shemos. And until the times of Noach, there were no divisions between the fingers. And therefore, we can understand everything much differently now. that in the times of Noach, when till then, they couldn't use agricultural equipment. They had to literally work the land with their webbed hands. And imagine plowing a field with a hand which is webbed. It's very impossible. It's very difficult. When Noach was born, they noticed that he had separated fingers. And not just from his time onwards, everyone had separated fingers. And therefore, it wasn't that they had prophecy, that necessarily that when he was born, they suddenly realized that he's going to change the world by introducing agricultural equipment, but rather they saw that he had fingers and that he was able to have independent fingers and you could move them and use and hold tools. And therefore, that changed the way they could work the land. And therefore, if you think about it, it gives light to the punishment that Adam Rishon was given. When it says "B'zeh asapecha toichal lechem," working the land was never the original plan, but because of the chait of Adam Rishon, he had to now work the land with his hands. That was very, very difficult, because to do that without any sort of agricultural equipment is impossible. So working the land with webbed hands was extremely difficult, and that was part of the klala to Adam Rishon. Noach's birth gave rise to an industrial revolution, and what took weeks previously to work the land now took days. And therefore it was a totally new world. They could now use metal implements, plows, and hoes and rakes and spades and all these things which they weren't able to use before, because their fingers were independent, but they were no longer webbed, and they could hold and grasp and bend like we can today. Now, that's just a very fascinating background. Rav Palm, and Rabbi Rosner quotes this, Rav Ram Palm, the well-known, beloved Rosh Hashiva of the last generation of Torah V'das in America, he's made an amazing insight into this. If these innovations were brought about in the time of Noach, then it obviously led to a lot of free time. Because like I said, if it took weeks to plow the land until now, because you could only do so with your hands, and now you've got agricultural equipment to do so, what took weeks beforehand would now take days. So suddenly everyone's got loads of leisure time, of free time on their hands, which for some is a blessing, but for others is a disaster. The Gemara says that sleep is a curse for tzaddikim, but a bracha for Rishonim. Let them sleep lots, because they're using their time so badly, better they sleep. Masha'en kein a tzaddik, when he's awake, is doing something positive. And therefore, this abundance of new free time was a massive danger and challenge to society. And it was that which led to the very rapid moral decline of the generation of Noach. Because all of a sudden, people had loads of free time. What are you going to do with it? Look at this Rambam. The Rambam says in Hilchos Isurei Bia, this is the last halach in the whole of Hilchos Isurei Bia, Perek Chof Beis Halacha Chof Aleph, this is the penultimate last box on the page, says the Rambam, V'chein yinhoig lihisrachik min hashchoik. His final words, says the Rambam, giving us all musa, that a person should make sure they distance themselves from schoik, from laughter, min hashichrus, and from drinking, or medivrei agovim, which is like flirtatious behavior, she'elu garmin gedolim, because it's a slippery slope, and you get involved in sort of light-headed behavior, in drinking, in flirtatious behavior. It's a slippery slope which could lead to all types of illicit, improper behavior. But the greatest thing is that a person should occupy his minds with productive things, with divrei Torah. V'yarchiv daito b'chochma she'ein machsheves orayis miskaberes ela belev ponim min ha'chochma. When is a person going to have improper thoughts? When is he going to think about orayis and these things? Says the Rambam, with a leiv which is ponim min ha'chochma. If a person is busy, is preoccupied with chavrusas and with positive endeavors, there won't be time to do averos. So what comes out from this Rambam is that the greatest antidote to improper behavior is just to keep busy, is just to be busy. And that's really what the Gemara in Makkah says, the last Mishnah in Makkah, the famous Mishnah, everyone gets very excited when they hear this Mishnah because they know the Rav is coming to the end of the drasha, and we're coming to the end of the Shiur as well, so this is appropriate. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to be Mezakas Yisrael. Why 613? Why do we need so many mitzvahs? So the Mefarshim have different explanations. But one simple explanation is simply that if there's such a plethora of mitzvahs, such an abundance of mitzvahs, we'll just be busy. We're preoccupied, we're super busy, there won't be time to do Averis. And therefore, that I think explains the three questions we started with. The first question was, how did it get so bad so quickly? The answer is, because what came at that time was an industrial revolution, which gave people loads and loads of free time, and that is very dangerous, because if you misuse free time, there's a vacuum, then that's a very rapid and steep, slippery slope to all types of corruption, promiscuity, and theft. Why the name Noach? So we've seen the word Noach means to ease, not to comfort. He eased the plight, the difficult working life of his generation. And what's the connection between Noach's name and the descent of mankind? Well, that's what we said. That's exactly the point. Because he came along and eased things for his generation, very soon afterwards, Vayar, Vayinochem Hashem ki oses odem ba'oretz, Vayitzasev al Hashem, etc., etc. And therefore we see that is exactly the connection between Noach's name and the rapid descent of mankind. And an astonishing insight. The quality of time, the importance of time used well. Like I said, for tzaddikim, time is a precious, precious commodity. I think Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, when his sons became bar mitzvah, he would buy them a gift. What would he buy them? He wouldn't buy them Shev Shmaitza, he wouldn't buy them Pnei Yeshua, or his own Sefer Emes Liyaakov. He would buy them a gift, and he would buy them a watch, and he would present it to his son and say, this is the most precious gift I can give you, because it's the commodity of time, the most precious gift we have. When the Chavetz Chaim, one time in Radin, the Rosh Hashiva and Naftali Trop got sick, and the boys wanted to do something in his zuchus. They wanted to dedicate, everyone should dedicate us a bit of time and give, and they would sort of donate time to give to Rabbi Naftali Trop, and therefore it would be added to his cheshbon. And they went around town, and this one would give a month, this one would give 2 months, this one would give 3 months. They went to the Chavetz Chaim. They said, what would you be willing to give to Naftali Trop? And he thought about it and said, I'm willing to give 1 minute. And the students were very surprised. But the Chavetz Chaim explains that's what a minute is, a hugely generous donation. And that's the idea. So let's just summarize what we've said. We've said two ideas today. Number one, we connected the end and the beginning of the Torah with the Netziv. Why Sefer Bereshis is called Sefer HaYosha? Because it tells the story of the Avos, and they were Yesharim. They were particularly upright and honest and pleasant in their interactions with a very corrupt and degenerate society. And the Chasam Sofer connects that between the end of the Sofer and the beginning of the end of the Torah and the beginning of the Torah, because the Torah begins Bereshis. Bereshis is Osius Yoshar Avos. The Avos had a Yashrus. But by the end of the Sefer, it's Yisrael. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is Yosha himself, Klal Yisrael, their mission was to become Yesharim. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu achieved. That was his final epitaph in the last pasuk of the Sedra, Le'enei Kol, that everyone was able to see Yisrael, the Yashrus of Klal Yisrael. They had Yoshael, the Yashrus, God's integrity, as it were, Hashem's Yashrus. And therefore, that's the connection between the end of the Torah and the beginning of the Torah. And then we asked three questions at the beginning of the Sedra, i.e., why is it that the world degenerated so quickly? Number two, why the name Noach, and what is the connection between Noach's name and the descent of mankind? And what we explained was an amazing thing that the Sefer Hasidim brings, this Medrash Abkir, that Noach was, until Noach's time, everyone had webbed hands. And therefore working the land was incredibly difficult. That was Odom Rishon's klala. And Noach came along, and he was born with split fingers. And therefore he was able to implement and to use agricultural tools, which now changed everything. It was an industrial revolution of the highest order. But the downside was that it led to lots of free time, and that explains the very quick, slippery slope down to the world of corruption, of promiscuity, and of theft. And therefore the message, of course, is to appreciate this valuable commodity of time and to use it well. And Amitzvah Hashem, please God, we shall do so over the coming weeks and months. The winter season is beginning with the beautiful Sefer Bereshis, which we're looking forward to explore and share together. Thank you.